You for joining us for this report launch on unlocking the gig economy's potential in India, right? And we've been at this for over a year at this point, and we're really excited to have you all join us as we share some of the findings and delve into an expert discussion on this very important topic for Indian workers and the Indian economy at large. My name is Rajah Augustinraj. I'm a principal at the Boston Consulting Group, and I'll be your host for the rest of this hour and a half that we'll spend together. On your page over here, you can see what our planned agenda is. We'll keep it moving pretty fast. I think just wanted to highlight a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This is being done in a webinar format. So during the event itself, we won't have an opportunity to read chat, comments, and the like. But for those of you attending, if there are questions that come up as we go through the event, please use the Q&A box for that. And then as we get into the panel discussion, we'll ask the moderator to moderate and redirect some of those questions as they come up. We're also recording this, so in a few days' time, this will be available in case you want to come back to any parts of this and revisit the topic. So you're welcome to do that also. Yeah. With that, let me not waste any more time, but let's jump right into it. Let me invite Vikas Jain, who's a managing director and partner at BCG, to kick us off with introductory remarks and set the stage for what we have coming up the rest of the session.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you. Thanks for kicking this off. First of all, thank you everyone for joining. We believe this is a very important topic and a very interesting one. But just starting off, as you reflect on 2020, we all believe it was an unprecedented year, and it has been. I think the important part has been it has impacted livelihoods of millions of people. A lot more in the low-income jobs, right? The traditional notions of work and workplace changed almost overnight. This was going on, in parallel, we've been continuing to see, the ride sharing, delivery coming to fruition. And in the notion of work, flexible work, gig, sharing economy, all of them started to come into the mainstream. And we've been all talking about this. But if you step back and think about this, gig is not new to India. We've had some version of gig, flex working for a very, very long time. It's just not been enabled by technology platform, but it's been more informal, more word of mouth driven. But now with these platforms, many more services are coming at our fingertips. And this is really what the gig and the platforms are bringing to bear. Given this whole thing, we actually decided that this is an important topic for India. And along with MSDF, decided to dig deep into understanding what the potential is, understand the dynamics of what is driving that in India. This is a discussion that started before COVID hit. And then, we went through the learnings of what has COVID done to this phenomena as we went through the report over the last year and a half, understood some of the pain points, and more importantly, spent some time thinking about what are the opportunities to actually make this bigger and how could this unlock opportunities and economic impact in India. We spent time talking to companies, individuals, the platforms themselves, the households, and importantly, the gig workers through this project and the report in very, very different contexts and setting, just to understand the real nature of this in India and what could drive this going forward. What has come out of this report and this study has been, it is an important part of the economy, and it has immense potential of what it can do to the country. And we'll hear a bit more of the specifics as we cover the highlights of the report. It will unlock significant efficiency gains. And as that happens, we believe there's productivity upside that will be there for us to capture. And we also started to understand and delve deep into just the nature of who the gig workers are. It's a very heterogeneous group, very different background, very different motivations on why people choose this form versus the other more established and traditional notions of work. With those few comments, I welcome you to the report launch. Please do take a moment to understand and absorb the findings. It's very, very interesting and rich. And do engage as the experts come on board and talk about the phenomena, the opportunity from their different vantage points, and please engage in that dialogue and with your question and answer. I wish you all a wonderful session, and thank you for joining. Rajah?
Thanks, Vikash. Let me not waste any more time. Let me just dive right into the report's findings, right? And as Vikash alluded to, we'll spend the next 12, 14 minutes or so just going through the key findings of the report and an overview of what we've articulated in the report. And then that'll be followed, of course, by Mr. Amitabh Kant's keynote address and an expert panel discussion. So I think plenty of opportunities to dive into all the elements that Vikash touched on in his introductory remarks as well. So let's dive right in, right? So I think on the main takeaway that I really wanted to leave you with for today is on the next page. If nothing else, right, what I want you to all of you to take away from this session is just the immense potential for India's economy and India's workers that the gig economy really presents, right? And at heart, I want you to take away three numbers. One is 90 million, one is 1.25%, and the number 8. 90 million because we estimate that up to 90 million jobs could potentially be serviced by the gig economy in the long term. That translates to roughly 30% of non-farm employment in India. 1.25% because we believe that up to 1.25% incremental GDP could be added to the Indian economy by the gig economy alone. And the number 8, which is quite critical in understanding that gig workers are not a homogeneous group, but rather they actually fall into 8 distinct segments, each of those segments having very different priorities, very different preferences and job drivers. And understanding those and catering to those specific job drivers and needs is crucial for us to unlock both the demand as well as the supply of the gig economy itself, right? But before we get into the details of all of this, if I were to rewind about a year, right, and go to the next page, even before the pandemic started, when we kicked off this effort in late 2019, early 2020, perceptions of gig work were already quite abounding in the media and in general conversation, right? And if you took a look at the conversations around this ranged from being incredibly positive on one end to incredibly negative on the other, and some people just saying, look, let's just regulate this thing as a regular workplace sort of phenomenon, right? Which raised a set of questions for us as a team, which was one, what really is the potential of this gig economy? Is it real or is it hype? How do the workers actually feel about gig work? Do they really see this as a means of sustainable livelihoods for themselves and their families? And most importantly, if we do believe there is a huge potential here, then what is there a way to holistically approach this in a manner that would unlock that potential for India? So these were the 3 questions that we really started out when we started this effort about a year ago, right? When we go to the next page, then as we started to dive into this, what we realized was just the huge gamut of just definitions around gig. What is the gig economy itself? If you were to do a Google search on this, would return a whole range of results, right? That deal with everything from on-demand hiring to asset sharing services, as well as a whole range of almost like workplace arrangements as well, right? Dealing with part-time labor, dealing with staffing services, just-in-time hiring. And all of this is before you take into account the fact that in India, gig is not new, right? We have always had on-demand labor as part of our economy from time immemorial, right? And so for the purposes of this report and to set the boundary conditions within which we wanted to do all our estimations and do all our projections, we defined gig work as part of this report on the basis of 4 parameters, right? One was we said that gig work is essentially transactional work where payment is made on a task or a time-based manner. We said that gig work deals with an individual worker and distinguishing that from a team of workers who could potentially take up project-based work. And we also said that gig work essentially requires flexibility of supply, basically giving the gig worker the option to choose when he or she would work, right? And all of this being underpinned by technology itself, right? So platform-enabled gig work is essentially what we're talking about here. And I will hasten to add before we move to the next slide that there are several gradations on all of these, right? So flexibility of supply could be limited by platform-specific requirements to put in certain hours of work a week and so on and so forth, right? So recognizing that there are several gradations, that was the working definition. Now, in estimating the potential of the gig economy in India, it's important for us to understand what the workforce of India itself looks like. On this chart, what we've laid out is the workforce size in India, which is in the non-farm sectors. Non-farming sector employs roughly 210 million people in India. Our total workforce is about 500 million, and the rest are sitting in all these non-farm sectors. Of this 280 odd million folks that are in the non-farm sectors, these are all dominated heavily by the biggies, right? By construction, by manufacturing, retail, and transportation and logistics as well, right? And if you were to look at this chart, right, and you think of the common gig services that you're quite familiar with, right, whether it is transportation, whether it's food delivery and the like, the representation of that on this chart is a minuscule portion, right, which was kind of our first indication that this potential could be incredibly huge. And so what we set about doing was then to say that we wanted to look at every single sector of the economy in India and identify what those job categories are and what the potential to migrate to gig-based employment could potentially be, right? So on the next page, what we've articulated is what we looked at from a sectoral view of the workforce. And we went about this essentially sector by sector, deep diving into understanding what job categories are there, what the industry practices are, and what opportunities were afforded if any of those job roles needed to be moved into a gig-based model of delivery. And what we found was actually quite striking, right? What we found was that even in this environment where there is a general sense that there is an overabundance of supply, there are still some skilled categories, especially in finishing roles in construction and equipment and trade specialties that do remain in scarce supply in our economy. And if at-scale gig platforms were to come into play there, this will expand consumption almost immediately. What we also found from our discussions and our estimations with corporates and MSMEs was that in the shared services space, there is a huge unlock that is waiting to happen. And specifically, this is dependent on the industries themselves and specific practices that exist. I've mentioned construction over here on this page, but in construction in particular, there are certain dynamics that have to do with how the security, site security, and handling and security of materials that are used in construction are handled. And there are huge demands and potential demands that are sitting and waiting to be unlocked over there. Net, what we came up with was that in the skilled dimension alone, there are over 24 million jobs that are potentially giggable. In the semi-skilled space, which could be everything from transportation services to facility services. Facility services isn't shared, but in the semi-skilled space, over 10 million. And in the shared services space alone, there are over 5 million jobs that are potentially giggable within the Indian economy. Within the Indian economy itself, right? Now, if you go to the next page, we also took a look at the household sector, right? And the household sector actually presents a completely different picture. We embarked on a fairly detailed survey of over 600 households across income tiers, across city tiers, and explored all manner of services that households generally have need for. And the results are what you might expect in some ways, right? The common set of services around maids and cooks and drivers were commonly mentioned, and most households exhibit the need for that. But once you look beyond that, right, there is also a huge long tail of services, over 30 services, in fact, that many households actually have a need for and indicate that these are either completely unserved or remain quite underserved at this point, right? Now, admittedly, depending on the income level and the city tier that you go to, the need and the intensity of the demand for these services does vary. But net, urban households, we estimate, have a need for roughly 1 FTE worth of services across all of these. And these range from gardening services to deep cleaning services, to babysitting and elderly care services and so forth. Yeah. Now, when you put all of this together, which we've done on the next page, what we find is this humongous number that actually emerges. And just to point out a couple of things on this. One is that across skilled, unskilled, shared services, and household demands, we add up potentially gigable roles of up to 90 million. Now, very quickly, you will notice that 37 of those million comes from actually unskilled roles, and a huge part of that is dominated by construction and manufacturing and transportation logistics. But even beyond that, right, when you look at skilled and semi-skilled roles, there is huge potential that is sitting in these big sectors of the economy, particularly in construction and in transportation logistics, as well as over 12 million jobs that are potentially gigable. These in FTE terms, right? So if you think about people working part-time, it could be even higher in terms of the number of people this could impact. Over 12 million jobs that could potentially serve households that through the gig mode of working. Yeah. Now, when you take a step back from this, one of the things that will be quite striking for you is just to say, look, these are huge numbers, right? These are huge numbers. The income ranges that these represent are quite large as well, right? And what we've done, and I welcome you to take a deeper look at the report where we've gone into this in some depth, is we looked at each of these categories of jobs and each of these sectors and identified what the efficiency unlocks are going to be for each of them. And just based on the efficiency unlocks alone, neglecting all the collateral benefits that would come from gig, just looking at the efficiency and productivity gains alone, what we estimate is that for the Indian economy, this could net add about 1.25% in incremental GDP. Incremental GDP to whatever the GDP is at the baseline, right? And we were estimating on a base of about $3 trillion economy for India, right? So this is material and this is sizable and certainly worth our effort and worth our attention to look at. The other question which comes up quite immediately as soon as you look at this is what we've articulated on the next page, which is who's going to do all these jobs, right? Gig work is great, but who are the gig workers? We undertook a pretty detailed study of the gig workers themselves. We went through an exhaustive exercise of qualitative research followed by quantitative research across various job categories, across various income levels, and across various industries, looking at the gig workers themselves and exploring with them what gig work is and what role it plays in their lives. And on average, right, if you take a step back at the summary of those findings, what we netted out is that by and large, gig workers relative to the overall workforce are generally younger. They tend to have slightly lower education levels compared to the overall workforce. They also skew towards being secondary contributors to household income. So they don't usually tend to be the primary breadwinners of the family. And they also typically work fewer hours compared to full-time job type of workers, right? Now, as soon as I say this, I want to also double click on this and go to the next page and tell you that once you look a little bit closer at this, the differences between the different segments of workers comes into sharp relief very, very quickly, right? And what is very important to note here is that each of these segments has a different trigger and a different job driver for when they take up gig work and how they go about doing gig work and the decisions that they make while they are in their jobs, right? And the dimensions that drive those decision-making parameters are actually 3 dimensions. One is that the life stage of the gig worker makes a huge difference. Oftentimes between students and non-students, the decision-making is very, very different. The perceived level of skill of the gig worker makes a big difference as well. So a high-skilled gig worker compared to a semi-skilled gig worker behaves in a very, very different way in kind of their choice of jobs and how they make their decisions about which next job to take. And then the third dimension, which is quite critical, is also their contribution to household income, right? So primary breadwinners tend to have very different decision-making parameters compared to those who are secondary contributors to the household income as well. Right. And there is a ton of detail behind this. And we've highlighted a couple of things in the next page that I just want to give you a taste of. But I do want to ask all of you to take a detailed look at the report and dive into this in some depth. Right. A couple of things just to call out. One is just that gig work is often triggered. Many of the workers we spoke to told us that gig work itself was triggered by the need to cover monthly household expenditures, right? And while this is true for many categories of gig workers, there are some segments where gig work is kind of a stopgap measure as well, where unanticipated expenses, where a medical emergency at home or a wedding that is coming up is triggering the need for some additional income, and somebody that perhaps wasn't working otherwise would probably step into the workforce for a shorter period of time to earn some additional money. In addition, gig workers also told us that they tend to often prioritize near-term earnings potential and work assurance. And this is especially true for folks that are, doing work like cabs, cab drivers or auto rickshaw drivers, where the number of hours that they work tends to almost equate to the amount of earnings that they're likely to generate. Right now, there are differences even within this, depending on the particular segment of the worker that you would look at. And two specific things I want to call out. One is that the willingness to trade off a job driver, right, for pay varies quite significantly depending on the segment of the worker that you look at. And so while many gig workers place a fairly low value on non-monetary benefits, work assurance and timely payment of the income tends to always rate very, very highly among all segments of workers. Similarly, satisfaction with gig work also tends to decline with skill levels of the workers themselves. And so workers with lower levels of perceived skill tend to be dissatisfied with their ability to earn more money or generate more increments of income as well. And understanding and catering to these specific pain points or specific needs that workers tend to have is quite critical in making sure that you are able to unlock the gig economy for all categories of workers that are participating in it. Why don't we go to the next page? I just want to use the time to perhaps just highlight two things, right? And I won't go into depth on this, but just to call out, there are categories of workers that we've profiled in the report that fall into something that we call purpose fulfillers. And there's another category of workers we have profiled called hopeful balancers. And these are just names that we came up with. But on the left are the category of workers who generally tend to be higher skilled, tend to have lower contribution to household income, and tend to be beauticians, chefs, and tutors, right? And the types of parameters that folks like this tend to prioritize is oftentimes in the realm of flexibility of work, of learning opportunities and growth opportunities. Whereas when you look at folks like cab drivers or auto rickshaw drivers who tend to be moderately skilled and have a high contribution to household income, the immediate income and earnings potential for them tends to factor far, far higher, as well as the work assurance, right, compared to something like income growth relative to other workers that we spoke to. Right, and there's a lot more detail on this in the report, and I certainly encourage you to take a closer look at it. Now, going to the next page, I just want to say that we spoke about the potential for jobs. We spoke about all the gig worker categories and our ability to add perhaps 1.25% to India's GDP. But all of this is not going to happen on its own organically, right? Through our work with corporates and MSMEs and households and talking to gig workers, what we've also identified in the report are 14 categories of prerequisites that are quite critical to unlocking the gig economy. Right, and the importance of each of these varies by the industry type and the type of service that you provide. But broadly, these are the ones that we tend to hear about often when we talk to folks, and ranging from background checks to pricing to transparency and availability to gig workers often talking about the importance of flexibility for the number of hours that they work, or transparency in what their take-home pay itself will look like. So depending on the specific use case that you might be thinking about, or the service that you are cultivating, having a very clear sense of not just your consumer base and what they're looking for in terms of prerequisites, but also catering to the segment of workers that are going to provide the supply for those services will become quite critical. And finally, I just want to leave you with the next slide, which is articulating the overall ecosystem, right? So This number of 90 million jobs that we spoke about, or these 8 categories of workers, and the addition of 1.25% to India's GDP won't happen with just the provision of prerequisites or just a set of platforms that are operating on their own. We do see the need for a broader ecosystem to be developed around this. That is an ecosystem of services, of information exchange, and public policy that can be conducive to enabling the gig ecosystem and its growth in India and unlocking it for India's economy. You can delve into each of these in greater detail in the report, but I just wanted to call out that when we talk about ecosystem enablers, we're talking about services that are provided to platforms to enable them to service their customers and their workers better. When we talk about digital public goods, we are talking about a layer of services and information exchanges that can provide credentialing standards, that can provide repositories of information that are that can provide mobility between platforms themselves. And of course, with public policies and regulations ensuring that not only is this a level playing field for new entrants and legacy providers alike, but also ensuring that there are sufficient protections for workers as they get into and engage in the gig economy in the years to come, right? So having said all of this, right, I think we can take a step back and say that, you can go to the next page, Shruti, that, the gig economy, and its benefits extend truly far beyond just the efficiency and productivity unlocks that we have highlighted as part of this, right? It is something that can create a more market responsive skilling employment ecosystem that is critical for our country as we continue to grow. It can expand our labor force participation to be far more inclusive than it is currently. And most importantly, it can also help formalize the informal part of our economy, bring our workers out of the shadows, and really create shared prosperity for all of us as we continue to see India into this new millennia, which will be India's millennia. And so with that, let me close with the last slide and just recapping the 3 numbers that I want to leave you with, which is 90 million for the number of workers that we could potentially serve with the gig economy, add 1.25% to India's GDP, and not forget the fact that gig workers are not a homogeneous group, but rather fall into 8 distinct segments, each with their own priorities and each with their own aspirations for livelihood and well-being. Okay, thank you very much. This, I know, has been a whirlwind tour through the report. There's a lot more detail associated with this, but let me just check to see if we have Mr. Kant, if he has joined us already or not. Simarji, do we know if Mr. Kant has joined us?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. So why don't we, as we wait for Mr. Kant to join us, why don't we bring on our panel, and let me invite Kanika to come on and perhaps introduce the panel. And then whenever Mr. Kant joins us, Geeta, if you could please help us do an introduction and give your remarks, and then we'll go right into his keynote at that point.
Thanks, Rajah. Thanks, Rajah, and thanks for taking us through the key highlights from the report. I wanted to quickly introduce the panel that we have today, and we have a very exciting panel. Starting with Anjali. We have Anjali Bansal with us on the panel. She's the founder of Avana Capital, which invests in and provides scaling up support to entrepreneurs who are building innovative products to enable real impact. In this role, she has invested in and mentored various successful startups such as Delivery, Urban Clap, Nykaa, and Lenskart. She also serves as an independent non-executive director on several leading boards, including Tata Power, Kotak AMC, and Piramal Enterprises. And she was earlier partner and managing director with TPG Growth Private Equity, looking not only at India, but also more broadly, including Southeast Asia, Africa, and Middle East. Welcome, Anjali, to the panel. We are really grateful to have you on board. Next, we have Darshan Hiranandani. Darshan leads H Energy, the energy venture of Hiranandani Group. He started his professional career at Hiranandani, where he pioneered the development of 23 Marina in Dubai, which is world's third largest residential tower. As part of the board of directors of Hiranandani Group, his achievements also includes the establishment of Dr. L.H. Hiranandani Hospital, which has been rated among the best in the country. Welcome, Darshan, to the panel. Next, we have Rahil. Rahil Rangwala. He's the Director of India Programs at Dell Foundations. In this role, he directs the Family Economic Stability Team in India, and he oversees the foundation's investments in financial inclusion and livelihood sectors. Before the foundation, he spent many years at Bridgewater Associates, which is a global macro hedge fund. Welcome, Rahil. And finally, we have Abhiraj Bhal. Do we have?
Yeah, he's still in the process of joining Kanika, maybe in a couple of minutes.
Okay, sure. So Abhiraj, I think, will join us soon. Maybe I'll just introduce him now and then get started with the discussion, and he'll join in, when he can. He's the CEO and founder of Urban Company, which is the largest home services platform in Asia. At Urban Company, he oversees the marketing and product growth in addition to serving as the CEO of the company. And finally, myself, I'm Kanika Sanghi. I lead the Center for Customer Insight for BCG in India. In this role, I work extensively with both retail consumers as well as just people in different sectors, trying to understand their behaviors and motivations. And I was involved, in the work which Rajah kind of spoke about from the perspective of specifically understanding the gig worker and how they look at gig economy. So just to get started, I would kind of take from what Rajah was sharing in terms of the potential size of gig in India, and Rajah had some very big numbers to share in terms of the job potential as well as the GDP impact. So just wanted to start from there and get everybody's views on what sectors do we see the most interesting from gig work perspective. Of course, we've already seen it in a few sectors, like ride-hailing, delivery services, where it's already big and getting significant. But even beyond that, just wanted to get everybody's perspectives on what other sectors do we see this becoming, quite significant in the near future. And maybe we can, start with Anjali.
Thank you, Kanika. And I'm first of all delighted to be here on this platform. I think the work being done by BCG and indeed Dell Foundation in this space is absolutely sort of path-breaking. And I know we will all learn a lot and get a lot more insight than we currently have. Many of us are involved and practitioners in this space. So this initiative is most welcome. Kanika, you said how many and what areas? I think I'll pick up the three numbers that Rajah started with: 90 million. So 30% of non-farm employment, 1.25% of GDP growth, additional GDP, and 8 distinct segments. So even if you look at the 8 segments themselves, and we did some work last year at the very beginning of this COVID pandemic crisis, there are 200 million blue and gray collar workers in India. So it depends on really how we define the gig economy. I think we tend to think about the gig economy as those that are already visible to us on digital platforms. So the Ola, Uber drivers, the Swiggy, Zomato delivery people, the couriers, the folks working with Urban Company, and I can see that Abhiraj has joined. So it'll be great to hear from Abhiraj as well, of course. But if you go beyond that, a large part of the Indian workforce, this 200 million blue-gray collar workers, in some ways are gig economy workers, even though they may not be attached to digital platforms. Some estimates say that the number of people attached to digital platforms is about 10 odd million, maybe 15. The number varies. So I think there is a big space between the 10 to 15, the 90, which is more organized, and the 200 that is really still in somewhat non-fully secure, sometimes part-time. We are not sure whether they are fully employed, so whether it's disguised sort of underemployment, if you will. So I think that is really the big space. And I like to think about it as an opportunity for us to really leverage and harness this human capital, provide them with the skilling, access to skilling. This is a very aspirational, energetic sort of segment of people. They want to make their lives better. So access to skilling, access to financial resources, healthcare benefits, and a lot of other things that I'm sure we'll discuss today can really help us unleash this segment of the Indian workforce as well.
Thanks, Anjali. Darshan, your views on that?
So, I mean, look, I couldn't agree more. And I'll try and highlight a few examples where we deal with this almost every day. So, firstly is there is a huge difference in let's say in our construction side of the business. We employ contractors have labor. Unskilled mason makes 100 rupees a day. A skilled mason makes 1,000 rupees a day. That's the kind of difference a contractor does to pay when it comes to paying these people, right? So skilling is critical. It's part one. And it adds so much value. And I'm saying there is no shortage in terms of, I would say that there is no shortage of employment in the country. I think the gap is there's a disconnect of skilling and there's a disconnect of even letting people know what opportunities are out there. I'm going to highlight one more. Welding. Now, people cannot believe what the salary of a good welder is. We're building cross-country pipelines in India. We're building water, gas, electric stuff. And a good welder is paid nothing less than between 50,000 rupees to 1 lakh rupees a month, plus all expenses paid because it's a remote location on top. There's a huge shortage of welders in our country. You'll be shocked. There's a fight amongst contractors for welders. With this whole thing, the hydrocarbon industry went to the Skill Development Commission saying, the Skilling Ministry saying, listen, guys, create a curriculum. We've got to create more skilling in this space. And there's a lot more to do. So I want to come back to this limited point, is that there is a huge potential, to skill people. So that certainly is there. But there's a huge potential today where we need to reach people in our country to say, listen, it's not just about if you go to college and become an engineer, you'll get a job. There is so much more that's needed. And that, frankly speaking, is fairly well paying as far as the averages are concerned. And I think that communication and message needs to go down quite strong.
Very well said, Darshan. Rahil, your opening thoughts on that?
Thanks, Kanika. I think a lot of what Anjali and Darshan have said kind of stole my thunder a little bit. So I completely agree with what they're talking about. And I am very excited, in terms of sector-wise, I think construction is a very exciting sector, predominantly because it is one of the largest employers in our economy. And I think the information asymmetry that Darshan's talking about, as well as the skill gap and the ability to organize that through digital platforms and moving them onto some of these discovery platforms. And some of our portfolio companies like LaborNet are trying to do that. So construction is definitely one big sector that I think can make this shift. I think you have to fill in the gaps that Darshan's talking about in terms of skilling, quality assurance, to kind of to build that trust on the demand side as well. And also creating some kind of work history and some digital history of the workers to be able to do this matching efficiently. And if I kind of flip it from another perspective, which is not looking at the sector where the demand is, but from a demographic perspective where opportunity lies, which would be an exciting opportunity. I would look at it from a gendered lens. The gig economy has a very, very powerful, it creates a very powerful opportunity to attract women back into the labor force. I mean, we know India right now, historical lows when it comes to women's labor force participation. And the shift to digital tasks, remote tasks, kind of fits the needs of flexibility that women are looking for to engage in the workforce on their own terms. So those opportunities, it can go across sectors, but I think the digital sectors, we're seeing over last year, online proctoring became a huge demand, and women were the ones who really filled that demand. You know, one of our portfolio companies, again, a Wigner, saw that big shift, and that pull for women, it was a really good fit. So I would say sort of two things, sort of the digital economy and remote work, and opportunities in construction.
Thanks, Rahul. And welcome Abhiraj to the panel. Rajah actually shared a little bit about how we are seeing, you know, opportunity both in the corporate and the SME space, but also very much in the household services space. And Abhiraj, you of course know that's part of the story very well. You've seen that play out over the last couple of years in India. I have been actually a part of driving that story from scratch, you know, at Urban Clap. So wanted to get your perspectives on one, you know, as you look at in context of urban company, which are the areas where you're seeing great momentum towards gig work, and also, you know, any perspectives you have on how driving gig in context of home services is actually very different from driving gig in context of corporate and SMEs.
Thank you very much, Kanika, for inviting me to this panel discussion. I think from the perspective of urban company, we are seeing a lot of demand and growth in two dominant sectors of home services. One is the entire space of beauty and wellness, where we are seeing services like beauty treatments, massages, haircuts, etc., really taking off and almost getting accelerated because of the pandemic. And here, a very large part of the gig workforce that works on our platform is also women. And almost 70 to 80% of our gig workers in the beauty segment are women. The other big segment where we are seeing increasing acceleration is repairs and maintenance at home. So this includes your plumbers, carpenters, cleaners, AC technicians, etc. Across these sectors, what is common is that the unit of supply is an individual service professional. So this is a one man or a one woman micro entrepreneur. They are going to homes to deliver these services, and prior to associating themselves with a platform like Urban Company, they would usually be working either as freelancers or some cases as full-time workers. What is needed to bring them onto a platform like Urban Company goes beyond just technology literacy and technology adoption. We have to do a lot of heavy lifting, particularly on training, because what we have seen is, and as Darshan was also alluding to this, quality typically runs very thin in the Indian context beyond the top sliver of service professionals. So to really scale the market, we've had to invest heavily in training. Just to put some numbers out there, today we run over 100 physical training centers across India. We have close to 200 full-time trainers on our payroll. And in any given month, we are physically training thousands and thousands of professionals. So there's a fair amount of heavy lifting that we've done there. There are other areas also where you have to help out, be it financing, insurance, providing the right tools, products. So it is a fair amount of heavy lifting on the back end, which as a lay consumer is sometimes not evident, and goes far beyond just creating and enabling through a technology platform. And that we think is critical.
Yes, I think, when as we did the piece of work also, what came out specifically in context of household services was that, and a few elements which were actually different from what we had heard from corporates and SMEs. We heard a lot of things around safety assurance, which became very important when it came to household services. So as a platform, how do you build that confidence among households that, whoever you're calling into your home has the right background checks in place, so they can be safe about calling the person home. Also, I think just availability on demand came out in a much bigger way when in context of household services. So yes, there are, I think, certain nuances as we look at it in the household services context versus the more corporate SME context, which has implications for the platform features or functionalities, which the gig player needs to take care of. Moving on to, we spoke a little bit already about gig workers, Abhiraj, and, as all of us were talking, just wanted to spend some time talking about gig workers and how well do we understand gig workers right now, or how well do we think we understand gig workers right now, and how well do we not, right? So just wanted to start off with a very open-ended question saying that how well, do we think we understand gig workers, and how critical do you think is that understanding as we are, talking about unlocking the potential of gig economy? I see, Anjali, you've unmuted yourself, so why don't you go ahead and answer first?
Kanika, you've given me such a good opening. I think we will understand a whole lot more about gig workers now that BCG is releasing this report. But beyond that, I think what we have understood, certainly, there is this segment of the digitally and technologically enabled gig worker who are in some ways fortunate to be associated with programs and platforms like Urban Company that are investing in providing them that skilling, as well as the financial services inclusion, if you will, right? Whether it is formal bank accounts, insurance, and health protection, which Urban Company does. So we need a lot more platforms like that. But for the most part, what we also know is that there is a very big digital divide. There is a skill divide that Darshan referred to. We have seen this as we were building out the Unnati platform, and I'll come to that in a minute. Certainly in construction that he has described already. But even beyond that, in services like logistics and transportation, which is the second largest sector that employs or gives livelihood to these contract and somewhat blue and gray collar workers. So in addition to just access to jobs, so they need an access to jobs, so they need the discovery, but also connection with skilling programs. This is, again, as I said earlier, an aspirational segment. They actually do want to go up the skill curve and the income curve. So access to skilling, access to financial inclusion, security, and providing those kind of rails and digital rails that create the utility for ID, for registration, for visibility, and background check, the skill inventory that's required. I think all of that is something that this segment very much needs today. Some of this will have to be built through public infrastructure, which is what we have been doing with the Unnati program through NITI Aayog and the Atal Innovation Mission, which is to create the largest digital access for livelihood platform to provide access to these 200 million blue and gray collar workers. But even beyond that, I think the programs that are run by folks like NSDC, funded by MSDF, I think a lot of these ecosystem enablers are now required for this segment.
Darshan, you.
Okay, let me put it. Let me sort of segue into an area that I think we haven't thought about yet, which is our. Unfortunately, the way the report is, we have got agricultural people and we have non-agricultural workers, right? And today, unfortunately, if I go anywhere, if I go to a place like Ratnagiri in Maharashtra, there's no non-agricultural person there. Everybody who wanted to do any non-agricultural work migrated to Mumbai, Pune. There is no other work there, so to speak. And I think that's a pretty sad and lopsided future for our country if everybody has to come to an urban center. And I don't know if people are aware, but we recently set up a data center business called Yotta, the largest data center in India now. And one of the interesting pilots we just did, and we successfully did it about 2 weeks ago, is we moved a 5,000-seater call center, a BPO service, entirely out of a commercial office. I don't know how thrilled my father is with that thought, but that's a separate point. We'll put that aside. But I'll tell you what the great thing about this. The great thing about it is that the entire BPO is has their people just on a tablet, any thin client sitting in a rural area, sitting in a town, sitting in a city, sitting anywhere. They do not need, of course, internet bandwidth, etc. There are some bits that are difficult, but the company provides them the thin client. The company, this is not ours. We just provide the data center for this outfit. Provides them the hotspot from Geo. They get connected and they click online and they provide BPO services. It's amazing, and I'll tell you why. Because it suddenly means that you can have somebody having farm incomes and a non-farm income on top. So they don't have to leave their home in the rural areas. They don't have to make the Hobson's choice of, do I get a low agrarian income and not get infrastructure around me and have to move to the city? And they don't have to make that choice, vice versa. They can be agrarian if they need to from 6 a.m. to 11. If they want to work further, they can. And this bit of services getting decentralized, coming out of cities through technology, I think is a fantastic opportunity which will change so many things. It'll start making infrastructure. If wealthier people, better people, wealth comes in rural areas, you get towns that'll have better infrastructure. There's an incentive for digitization in those areas because suddenly you have start seeing usage. Health services, everything starts becoming more real. So it's a baby step, but something that we should focus on incentivizing.
Yeah. Abhiraj, coming to you, what evolutions are you seeing among workers on your platforms with respect to taking up gig jobs or even seeing it as a sustainable source of livelihood?
Kanika, I think just to respond to the original question that you had asked, which is, do we understand the gig workers and their aspirations? I would say what we've seen is really three things that matter to them: earnings, respect, and social security. Let me start with earnings. The semi-formal and informal sectors in India have historically been plagued with low earnings. And low earnings could be as low as 4,000 to 5,000 rupees a month, scaling to maybe 15 to 18,000. But really, in a in a city today, in an urban area today, or even in a rural part of India, that is very lower middle class income, which is not sustainable. And Ruchir Sharma talks about it in his book Breakout Nations, where he mentions that for a nation to really break out, you have to get to that $5,000 GDP per capita point. And that's really when discretionary consumption kicks in and the economy goes into a positive flywheel. And that roughly translates to about 30,000 rupees in monthly income. So I think the red line or the sweet spot is 30,000. And we have to see how more and more workers cross that threshold, because at that point, basic food, education, healthcare, living, etc., all of that is taken care of. And really, the next generation can aspire to do more. So earnings is critical, and we see stickiness on our platform when you cross that 30,000 threshold. And of course, over time, they want to earn more. So they want to have a path to take that 30 to 40, 50, 60 and beyond, which as a platform we intend to provide and are already providing. But as a starting point, I think 30,000 is critical. The second is respect. See, historically, for various reasons, the roots of which are actually in our caste system, the respect for these trades and these works in India has not been there. And so any person working with their hands is seen as a suboptimal, subpar profession, vis-a-vis, doing more intellectual work, for the lack of a better word. This is evident in trade fairs that NSDC conducts year after year. There'll be 40 different sector skill councils which will be there, and you will see a long queue in front of the Retail Sector Skill Council, but sector skill councils in plumbing and carpentry, etc., will have no takers, even though there are jobs. So I think one of the things that platforms have to think about is how to engineer respect. Um, One of the things, for example, we learn from our gig workers is they love the fact that beyond higher earnings, they also get respect because now they're an urban company professional. Manifests in very small ways. When you're walking into a condominium, the security guard will respect you, will let you walk in easily, as opposed to asking you a couple of questions, why are you coming, etc., etc. The third is social security. And I think here, beyond the role that platforms like us are playing, which is providing for life insurance, accidental insurance, health insurance, loans, etc., the government has taken a huge step last year by codifying gig workers as a third class of labor beyond formal and informal, and creating what is now known as the gig fund. And the gig fund is a social security fund, which, at least to start with, formal platforms like ours will provide for as a percentage of our revenue. And then all gig workers who are registered with this fund will have a variety of social security benefits, including maternity leave, including accidental and life insurance, etc. In fact, the talks are to extend all benefits of ESIC to workers who are registered. And we expect in the first year itself to be able to get collections worth over 500 crores towards this fund. And this is only from the contributions made by the companies. And we are hopeful that the government will also make a matching contribution. So I think these are the three key aspirations that we have seen gig workers talk about. Yeah.
Thanks, Abhiraj. And I think a lot of that resonates very well with the research that we also undertook for the purpose of this report. It came out, I think the only one maybe which we observed, and maybe you didn't talk about that explicitly, was around assurance. That came out in a big way, in the work that we did with workers. That it's not just the amount of earning, but the certainty about maintaining that flow and the assurance that you will get your payment as per a predefined time, and that they would not have to follow up to get their rightful dues. That came out in a very, very big way. We were also doing our research in the COVID context, so it might have been enhanced because of that context, but nevertheless, it did come out as a very important driver for gig workers, as much as even when we force people to make a choice between higher salary or assurance for a slightly lower salary, a lot of people ended up actually picking assurance but a slightly lower salary over a higher amount. So I think that is the only one which I would add to the three that you spoke about. But otherwise, fully agree with the points that you articulated. Rahul, coming to you, I wanted to ask you, as you have at the foundation made investments across different kinds of gig players, what kind of opportunities have you come across, different segments of gig workers?
So in terms of opportunities in different segments, I think one of the things that it's become a lot clearer, and I think this research has helped us also understand this a little bit better, is there's two sort of, I would say, life stages, as you call out in the report, which is students and students, and I would say broadly people who are just starting off in their work careers or their professional world of work kind of path. The gig economy is a good way for them to either transition into the workforce or sort of earn some supplemental income while they're in school and actually get some work experience as well. I think that student segment is a very big one, which is becoming more and more clear to us. And I think the second piece, which I think is also very important in terms of understanding, to your earlier question of how important it is for us to understand this segment. There is a lot of attrition in the gig economy, right? I mean, in these platforms, and you really need to understand their drivers and what is important for these workers so that you can engage them for longer, give them what it is that they're looking for in a professional context, as well as from a long-term career perspective. And one of the things that has become very obvious is that a large number of people engaging in this profession are supplementing household income. And for those that are supplementing income, the drivers for why they engage and what is important to them is very different than somebody who is the main breadwinner of the family. And I would categorize that as sort of a little bit high skilled or some more towards the micro entrepreneur category, where what they're looking for is very different in terms of drivers. So women would be one segment that is supplementing income. I think students again is another example of those part-time and looking for more flexibility. So I think those two segments for us, sort of show up when we look at our portfolio companies and try and understand the behaviors of what is driving these workers on these platforms.
Thanks, Rahil. Just moving on, talking a little bit about the gig platforms. Anjali, wanted to ask you that in your involvement in government-supported portals like Unnati, where do you see big opportunities and challenges from the platform side?
On platforms, for the most part, our experience actually has been very positive when it comes to what we consider demand. And demand, whether it is large corporates, and large corporates, of course, are big employers of contract labor in construction, in logistics, in transportation, even in manufacturing for that matter. So there is a great need felt from their side to actually organize this workforce and be able to have, they are digitizing their enterprise processes. So they actually also want this workforce to engage with them digitally. Right now, they work through a lot of contractors. So consequently, there is a need to, in some ways, bring contractors onto these platforms. The intermediaries today are a requirement. So you have to get the intermediaries. So on the demand side, employers want these platforms. Unnati for sure. We are bringing contractors onto the Unnati platform as well. On the supply side of labor, so the workers, the shramik, if you will, that is where there is a big challenge in getting them organized, getting them onboarded onto digital platforms. In some of the more white collar type professions, particularly the ones that say Rahil was referring to, folks that are coming out of schools and colleges and the students, they're educated. In a lot of this 200 million blue-gray collar workforce, the level of both literacy as well as digital literacy is low. Access to smartphones is limited. So consequently, we have to find ways to bring these people on board onto these digital platforms so that they become visible and in some ways provide that kind of support to them. Fortunately, today, I mean, we have more than a billion people in this country who are Aadhaar, so they are visible, they are identifiable. They have Jan Dhan accounts, so consequently, they are also visible to the formal financial ecosystem. So I think there is that in-between bridging that still needs to be done. So that's one. Abhiraj mentioned the benefits and the security net. The second thing that needs to happen is for the formal financial system, for us somehow to figure out how to actually provide financial services in a sustainable way to this segment, in a way that is commercially sustainable and not merely something that has to be provided by the government. We have seen this in microfinance, for example, over the last 25 years. What started as sort of a program to enable poor women actually is a very legitimate mainstream business and very successful. A lot of the early microfinance companies are now small finance banks and full-on fledged commercial banks, right? So I'm very hopeful, and in some, I actually also want to share an example of a livelihood support loan program that got put together at the height of COVID last year through conversations with Dell Foundation, with Rahil, with Geeta, and actually at the behest of Abhiraj. And we're on the verge of rolling out the Sadhan program with support from Dell Foundation and in partnership with Urban Company, designed specifically for gig economy workers, which can give them access to affordable credit, customized products, gives them respect. It assumes that they are willing to pay and they're good credit risk, right? So I think we need more such programs as well, from the government side, but also from the private sector side, and sometimes in partnership, the PPP model, if you will.
Thanks, Anjali. I think Mr. Kant,
can I just, sorry, I mentioned one more thing before I forget. Rahil had mentioned gender, and the engenderedness we have found that there is an even bigger digital divide in this segment when it comes to gender. So women tend to have the least access to digital devices and so on. But again, if we think about the white collar segment, the BPOs, and Darshan referred to them, and one of our companies, CoverFox, again, had to actually turn around and go to a remote call center. The unintended positive consequence of that is they were able to increase their female workforce dramatically because now nobody needs to come to the office. We're all able to act as agents working from home much more flexibly. And so all the issues of physical safety and travel and mobility just go away. So maybe things like COVID also provide us the opportunity to innovate and change our frame of how we think about the workplace.
Correct. There is, as it said, there's opportunity in any crisis. Right. So I think Mr. Kant has joined us, and so we'll take a little bit of pause and maybe resume these discussions after his address. Geeta, can I invite you to welcome Mr. Kant?
Sure, Kanika, and till he joins, maybe I'll just take a couple of minutes to also, go over why we did the report, why now, why the timing is right, and also about how we are using it. So firstly, why, at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, we have been working towards achieving, improving life outcomes for children and youth from urban low-income families. And this is what we call the aspirational India, the India that is, aware of and aspires to be a part of the high growth economy, a part of, the global India, and yet gets excluded because they either don't have the means or access to it. And I think to bridge that gap, the tech-led gig platforms are a great way to improve at least their access to better jobs, better incomes, etc. So understanding the gig economy from the perspective of our target segment, which is the low-income youth, and how they interact with it, how they benefit from it, what are the concerns, was extremely important for us as we were thinking about expanding our livelihood portfolio, which today impacts about 1 million urban low-income youth in India. And most of the projects that the foundation funds are very direct projects. They actually lead to change in income levels or change in education levels through our nonprofits or for-profits or the government. But we do have some indirect projects where we try and either inform the ecosystem or aggregate data on the ecosystem. So this particular report and research with BCG was really to say, at an ecosystem level, what do we know about the gig economy? And again, taking on a low-income user lens to it. I do think, as I said, the timing is right now because yes, there is a digital divide, and yet there, with the reducing costs of phones, data, it's, with Aadhaar, there is a large part of India which can access the gig platform. So, the need to formalize the informal, I think we have some of the basics in place. And as soon as we get a better understanding of, the personas, the customers, the low-income users, we can actually make sure that the gig economy that is growing from here includes these users in a much more integrated, inclusive, responsible manner. A lot of the portfolio companies that we support, and Rahil spoke about it, whether it's a work matching platform through WorkX or a fulfillment platform through a Wigner, or even an intracity logistics player through a Blowhorn. They found the discussions very useful in terms of saying, identifying who is my customer, how do I prioritize them, and how do I channelize my marketing spend so that I design, one, I do more effective marketing, better ROI. Two, I design better products and services for them. And in the end, these business models become much more sustainable and therefore a dependable source of revenue or income for our target segment. So I would say really, that is how we plan to use it. I also think this is really the start of a discussion. I don't think this is conclusion of a research or a project by BCG. This is the start of a more structured, more informed discussion on the gig economy. I think it has a significant potential, both from an economy perspective and employment perspective, productivity perspective. And definitely, I would say, is a almost a pathbreaker for the aspirational India and improving our labor participation rate. So I think we are heavily invested in this space and trying to make sure that the gig economy of tomorrow includes the low-income customer right from the start. Rather, actually like to invite Mr. Kant. He's here. He needs no introduction, but I think it would be great to hear from you, Mr. Kant. I mean, your views on the gig economy, its place in India, and also the policy stage for it. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And let me start by first congratulating Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and BCG for undertaking this initiative and launching of the detailed report on how we can further unlock the potential of the gig economy in India. Actually, over the last decade, rapid advancements in digital and telecommunication technologies, both of them have resulted in a major tectonic and permanent shift in our labor market, both in formal as well as informal sectors. And this period of the last decade has also seen the emergence of on-demand, very task-oriented employment avenues for skilled as well as semi-skilled workforce. Second key factor has been the access of affordable smartphones and cheap internet. And this has led to the creation of these short-term, very time-bound, on-demand job opportunities. By one estimate, over 15 million such independent gig workers today are employed across construction, retail, food, home care, IT, and many more sectors. The gig economy is part of a very major transformation occurring in India's work landscape. Today, various digital platforms not only connect service providers with customers, but also aid in price and market discovery and provide a quick feedback mechanism for both the provider as well as the consumer. Many of the urban centers across the country function on the back of these crucial services provided by our gig workers. In fact, many of these services will not be able to function without the gig workers. To my mind, the gig economy has a huge upside potential for a massively labor-abundant economy like ours. It provides for semi-skilled and low-skilled workers a major and a real opportunity towards achieving greater financial independence and an opportunity towards achieving their economic aspirations, whether it is for providing additional source of income for the family or paying for college. And these opportunities are not limited to only semi-skilled and low-skilled workers in more traditional sectors like construction and retail, but also skilled workforce. We now have a huge army of highly educated engineers, language experts, photographers, artists, barbers, and as I was hearing, urban company, whole range of people, beauticians, research, and so on, and who now offer their services on a gig basis. And the gig economy, to my mind, I see the gig economy as the next logical step with regards to the future of work. Aided by the rise of massive online platforms, gig economy roles provide more flexibility, thereby allowing people to work on price, time, and terms that works best for them. This democratization of work has also benefited the enterprises and individuals availing their services, and this has resulted in reduction in associated upfront and recurring costs. The gig nature of working is definitely, it is creating millions of micro entrepreneurs and is now a driving force towards shaping a more inclusive labor market in India. The recently launched report that the gig economy model has the potential to serve 90 million jobs across non-farm sectors of the economy and add up to 1.25 to India's GDP is really heartening. And this is, to my mind, a massive opportunity, and I'm certain that every possible support necessary will be extended by the government side towards realizing this potential. We will all work towards assisting the gig workers. An important step in this direction has been taken with the passing of the Social Security Code, which actually covers gig workers as well. A key lesson that has emerged during the last 1 year of dealing with the pandemic crisis is the need for making Social Security protection available for gig workers. We need to create safety nets and institutional capacities to protect gig economy participants from unemployment in the time of crisis. The lack of employment rights and various other social protection measures such as health and retirement benefits deter many from being an economic contributor. And therefore, we need a holistic policy framework and financial system to support our gig workers. Our gig worker, our cab driver, our domestic help, home and beauty care technicians, food delivery people, and many others, to help them realize their potential and be a very major economic beneficiary as well as a contributor towards India's economic rise. I believe that the many digital platforms that we have today and many more that will come in future will help increase earning opportunities along with extending social protection, increased convenience, credibility, and greater social protection. One of the challenges given to us by the Prime Minister during the COVID period was to see how technology can be used to leapfrog in the post-COVID era. We worked across several platforms, but one of the key areas that we have worked with was Unnati, where we worked with a whole range of experts, including Anjali, who was involved, Adil, and many more, on how we could create a very simple platform, a very simple high-tech platform, but extremely simple, modular, where workers can come here and actually tell their expertise, and simultaneously all the leading companies could put the job requirements that they have, and we could match them. A lot of huge amount of work has gone into this, and Unnati has emerged as a very major platform. We are driving this forward in partnership with both the Labour Ministry and the Skill Development Ministry. And I'm sure all of you should have a look at Unnati and see how best it can be a very key driver of the gig economy in future. I think the Ministry of Youth Affairs, the Ministry of MSME, the Labour, all of us are working together to make Unnati a very key driver of this gig economy. Once again, I congratulate the team of BCG and Michael and Susan Dell Foundation for coming out with a detailed deep dive into India's gig economy, which will encourage all our private sector and public sector enterprises to come forward and participate actively in shaping a very thriving and equitable gig economy in India. With these few words, I'll conclude. My congratulations again and all the best to all of you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Kant. Kanika, would you like to take it over from here?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Kant, for those words. Just resuming, what we were talking about earlier about the role the tech platforms can play in driving growth in the gig economy. I had a question for Darshan. Darshan, you spoke earlier about how skilling is very important and how, in context of your sector also, in some of the areas, you face a lot of skilling related gaps. So I wanted to ask you, what role do you think gig platforms can play in upskilling and certification of workers in India?
So Kanika, I think multiple areas. So part one is reaching out to people and maybe through some public service system, maybe the government can make it mandatory where your apps can have your YouTube videos and your others can have ads about, listen, these are the opportunities available for skills. So I said the first gap is people in the areas knowing what jobs are out there and what jobs are in demand and employment exists for those jobs. So I think the first part is there. Second part, again, on the tech side is, as I was mentioning about the construction sector, the hydrocarbon sector, there's huge demand for these detailed skill sets, even in manufacturing, right? You've got your fitters, you've got your electrical, wiremen, forging people, a whole bunch of deeper skill sets needed, where you need a little more infrastructure built around it. So we need a lot of tech on train the trainers. We need a lot of tech on a little bit of remote theory that can happen, where the time that's spent in the physical space could be lessened. So can we do more people where if again, coming back to an example, let's say an electrician or a welder or whatever it is, right? Some bits of education and training, can it be remote? Can it be on a remote device? And they're in a physical training that has to happen can come in person. I do think one area where tech really needs to come in is, we have this thing called the Building and Construction Workers Act in every state. Until today, in every state, huge amounts of monies remain unclaimed. People are not able to identify those workers. So we're making a huge amount of effort to create something afresh for gig workers. But the construction workers who are a mobile workforce, they remain sort of fairly damned, so to speak, because it's been very challenging for them to avail the benefits where the funds are there. I remember when COVID struck, I wrote a letter to the Maharashtra government, requested the Chief Minister's office saying, you've got money in building and construction workers funds, release those and at least feed the workers that are migrant workers that are out there. And they suddenly realized, oh my God, we've got 27,000 crores sitting in these accounts. So I think tech has another role to play. And like Unnati is working on the gig workers, I think the definition certainly should be for construction workers. And we should try and see how we can help those in the BOCW Act get involved and get help of these services as well.
Thanks, Darshan. I think, I think it's been a very exciting discussion. If I were to just maybe quickly summarize some of my key takeaways, I would say maybe 3 or 4. First, obviously huge opportunity and not just restricted to the sectors where we are seeing this right now. A lot of this actually is in sectors like construction, manufacturing, transport, logistics, where the full potential is not currently exploited. And if done well, we could see a huge growth of gig in some of those sectors. Secondly, I think understanding of the gig workers is very important. They are different from people who are doing the more traditional jobs, but also they are a very heterogeneous group among themselves. So understanding the different gig workers, their motivations, aspirations, and what they are looking for from the job is very important. Some of the more commonly understood things may not be right as we start, dissecting the larger worker space and looking at specific parts of that. Thirdly, I think there is, in order to boost this growth, there is a lot which needs to be done. I think there is a role which different stakeholders need to play in that. Of course, the tech platform themselves, have a strong role to play, but there is a set of things which the larger ecosystem needs to do beyond just the platform itself. And some of this we spoke about. I think Anjali made a few points around some of the ecosystem enablers. Also, there was a discussion on some of the more digital goods which can be there, which can help enable that growth. So thank you all for joining for this panel. It was lovely to interact with all of you on this exciting topic. And I'll hand it back to Rajah, for any closing thoughts and remarks.
Yep. Thanks, Kanika, and thank you to all the panelists for really an engaging and super insightful discussion. I was just watching the Q&A box as well. And I know we didn't get to all the questions that were asked, but please feel free to reach out to us, and any open questions, we're happy to sort of answer them offline. But just to close us out, I just want to reiterate and what Mr. Kant was talking about, right? And I think it flows so clearly into the findings of our report when he spoke about the tectonic shifts both in telecommunications as well as the nature of work itself, and the role that tech platforms essentially have in bringing both transparency and efficiency to job matching. And then he spoke about how democratization of work is leading to micro entrepreneurs, that everybody with a skill set is essentially can run a P&L for himself or herself. And then the efforts that are underway at the governmental level, but then as we heard from the panelists as well, individual efforts from entrepreneurs, from service providers, as well as from social sector actors and investors, that is truly contributing to the gig economy has for India's economy, and India's workers. So let me, on my behalf as well, thank you all for your attention and your participation in this. You see a QR code on the screen as well as the link to the report. Both of these are now live, so you should be able to access both the executive summary as well as the full report. We welcome you to take a look through it and dive into all the details that perhaps we couldn't cover in this 90-minute slot. But we look forward to engaging with you regardless of whether you're a social sector actor, a government public policy advocate actor, or an entrepreneur. We look forward to it. So again, thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being part of this. Have a good evening.